Welcome, one and all, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, men, women, and children. Welcome to the season finale of the Ultimate Hockey Show.
You've
Yeah.
covered everything.
Huh?
I said you covered everything. Women, children, men, women, children. I mean,
welcome in general. My name's
okay.
Michael Gill. On the left, he is with Petty. Good evening, Rick.
Good evening. I was going to say, unless we're broadcasting like into outer space and there's extraterrestrials that might enjoy watching hockey or something and they happen to grab the Rogers satellite feed or something. Otherwise, it's just men, women, and children. But yes, I'm doing great, Michael. How about you?
I'm doing good. Rob, yes, we did get your test comment in the feed here, so feel free to pound away, as is everybody else. The Game Time TV live feed for today. Welcome, Rob and others. This is the season finale of the Ultimate Hockey Show. I should clarify, the last scheduled show, and if something earth-shattering happens, you can bet we'll be back within reasonable time. We usually take this free agency, or the first show after free agency, and we packed it in for until October, barring something earth-shattering as well. So just thought I'd mention that. It's a great way to recap and thank everybody for watching this season, watching our playoff coverage on Game Time TV. So a couple of Game Time Today shows scheduled for next week. I see Trey has entered the chat. Welcome, Trey Colbeck, my co-host, one of the co-hosts of the Canadian Football Countdown, and the two shows that they do over there. You can catch that. Actually, they had a show last night, which I'm told they did a nice job promoting this show as well. So thank you guys. So they're on Wednesdays and Mondays at 9 p.m. Central Time. You can catch all the details on the Game Time YouTube, and they simulcast on our platforms as well. Well, without further ado, Rhett, let's get into I don't know what you want to call it, the overspending frenzy that seems to happen when the market opens up. But if I could just take this to Tampa Bay for 1 minute, they counter everybody and say, we're going to hand out 3 8-year contracts. First off, what do you think of what Tampa did? Cirelli, Sergachev, and they handed out one more as well. But those two are kind of the main two. I think Cernak may have gotten one too. He was the third person. What do you think of Tampa's plan here? 2 straight cups, a run to the final, just a fight on the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Well, I mean, I guess it shows, we have talked about this so much. You have your superstars and you have your entry-level guys and those middle-range guys that used to be so important, veteran guys, sort of on your second and third line. Those are now being filled up with younger players. So most teams now, they're up against the cap. What are they doing? They are signing their stars, like the guys that they say drive the bus, that are our core guys, whatever you want to call it, our core guys, our guys that drive the bus, our superstars, the guys that we can't win without. Those guys we lock up, and the other guys, they just shuffle in and shuffle out. So with Tampa Bay, Blake Coleman comes in from New Jersey, he goes out to Calgary. He wins a cup or two. Like that, that's all they do. But then there are core guys, Stamkos, Hedman, Cirelli, Sergachev now, Cernak. I'm shocked that they didn't do it for Palat, but I guess they just thought we could only do it for so many guys and only keep so many guys. But it just shows you they're locking up their superstars for big money. And what do? You sign, they're going to have how many guys? 5, 6, 7 guys making $5 million plus a year for the next however many years. Like Tampa Bay, like they've got a whole bunch of guys, like 6 or 7 guys that are like your top end, your ringers, making big money. And then you've got a whole bunch of guys on entry level contracts. And what do you got in between? Not much. You just got to bring in a guy here and there. Whoever sign a free agent, sign somebody who wants to be part of a winning organization and wants to live in Florida, I guess. But do I understand it completely? I guess I do. I'm not sure that I would go that way, especially now with the way the market is. But you know what these teams, I think a lot of these teams are thinking, and this, maybe I'll say this and I'll throw it back to you. I think a lot of these teams are thinking, we've had COVID, we've had the salary cap kind of in essence frozen for the last few years. It went up $1 million, but that's nothing. So, but it's been at 82 million roughly for the last 3 years. Hockey's going to grow again. Hockey's going to expand. There's going to be whatever it is, it's going to go back to normal. It's going to grow, and the salary cap as a result is going to grow. So we're counting on that we're signing these deals now, because we think even though they are rich now, halfway through the years of this contract, in year 4 and 5 out of the 8, they're going to be a deal from that point on, because the time value of money is going to be lessened and guys are going to make more and more. So they're thinking halfway through this contract and more, these are going to be super deals compared to what everybody else is going to have to sign. I'm not so sure about that, but I think that's what they're counting on, the salary cap going up and everything being okay in the future. But it's risky, right? So look at how it is now. You and I were talking, I'll throw it back to you. Look at how it is with Chicago. And this is, I think you and I were talking about this off air and off the show. Why is Chicago getting rid of DeBrincat? Why aren't they getting rid of Taves and Kane? And they may still, but they got to shed salary because they're carrying still another year for Duncan Keith and his albatross contract for 10 years at whatever that was, $6 or $7 million a year. He retires. They still going to eat that $5 million in their salary cap for this year. So these things happen when you sign these long-term deals to your stars. I know why you do it, but you got these problems at the end, which are not easy to deal with. So I'm not a huge fan of it. I understand why they do it, but I'm not a huge fan of it. How about you?
So here's the question: if I'm getting your drift kind of correctly,
Yeah.
are you suggesting that Tampa's being too loyal to too many players?
Well, I don't know the ages of all those guys. I would imagine all of them, because they've been with Tampa Bay for a while. They're either
Yeah.
going to be in their late 20s or early 30s, right? How old is Cirelli? 27? I think
Yeah, he
27.
came in at 23. He's played in the last number of years. Point.
27, 28. So you're signing
Yeah,
him until he's 36. And Cernak, I don't know how old Cernak is. He got 8-year deal. Was he 29, 28?
yeah,
Like, you're signing these guys. Like, I understand some guys can play until their late 30s and still be effective, but how many? I don't know how many in a team. Look at Wheeler. We have one 36-year-old,
yeah.
and he's starting. He's a great player, and his production over the last few years is just. Now, he was injured. He had COVID. You can make all those excuses, but it's the law of diminishing returns. I don't think you get as much as you do at the end as you do at the beginning. I understand why you sign them, but that's why you don't sign so many. The Jets only have one big contract like that. They had one with the Bufflin, but then he retired. So now they just have one with with Wheeler for this 8 years at $8 million. But Tampa Bay, they've got a huge one for Stamkos and Hedman already signed. Also, yeah. Kucherov, that's 3. Now they signed 3 other guys to 8-year contracts. They got 6, 7 guys there with 8-year contract. But
Yeah, I'm not disputing that either. We have some breaking news that came in just before the show started. I don't know if you caught this. The Ottawa Senators have signed center Josh Norris to an 8-year, 7.95 AAV contract. How do you see this one? Because to me, I see this completely different. I see this Ottawa banking on the future. They see Josh Norris as either their number 1 or number 2 center. Probably number 2 behind Alex DeBrincat. Probably DeBrincat, Norris. Everybody kind of slots downward from there. This is buying ahead of time before this player comes into his prime. Like he's done a much smaller sample size. I think we just lost your camera there, Rick. No,
Oh,
okay, you're okay now.
okay.
No, but I think it's a much smaller sample size with Josh Norris and Ottawa trying to buy ahead. And they're hoping that over the course of this contract, that this big money that they gave Norris now will be cheap at the back end of this contract
Right.
in 4 or 5 years from now. So there's that side of the calculated gamble as well, which is why nobody really knows. Everybody thought the cap would go up and up and up and up and up and up, and it would be in excess of over 100 million. Clearly, that didn't happen. In fact, we've only gone up like 1 or 1.5 million in the last 3 years or 4 years.
Yeah.
So it's dangerous to forecast, and you can only do your best educated guess. Are you surprised that Ottawa was number one able to lock up Josh Norris this early?
I'm not surprised at all. If I'm Josh Norris for 8 years and roughly $8 million a year, I sign that all day, every day. And I just looked, that one I looked at, he's 23 years old. I don't know when he turns 24, but he's 23. He's had 1 year where he's done something. And now okay, I guess they have enough faith and confidence in him. And I think it's exactly to your point, just like it is with Tampa Bay. They're thinking salary cap is going to go up. And out of those two scenarios, I'm actually more inclined to be enthused about signing a 23-year-old guy who's your number one or number two center for the next 8 years at $8 million a year versus signing a 31-year-old or a 30-year-old guy for 8 years, sort of to reward him. They're not rewarding Josh Norris. They're exactly like you say, they're paying into the future. And if I'm going to look at the two, I think what Ottawa did is smarter than what Tampa Bay did. The downside for Ottawa is that your sample size for Josh Norris is very small. He hasn't won anything. You haven't even been in the playoffs for the last 5-6
Yeah.
years, right? So,
we have some great news. Sorry?
No, I just want to ask you one other thing. You said DeBrincat is the centerman. I thought Stutzla is the center and DeBrincat is the winger. I don't think DeBrincat plays center. I don't think so. I thought he was a winger.
Maybe you worked that around a certain way.
Yeah.
I think to me, DeBrincat, Stutzla, and then even if you put Josh Norris, like that's a pretty good 1, 2, 3. Or you can flip flop your wingers, right? I mean, a centerman can play wing an awful lot, as we've seen, but it's very hard for a winger to play center. So you're better off stocking up on centers when you can. We have some breaking news, and that is that the Winnipeg Jets have made a splash in the free agency pool. I just got confirmation from the Winnipeg Jets PR team. They have signed former Arizona Coyote Kyle Capabianco to a 2-year, less than $1 million contract.
You froze, Michael, or is that me?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, Kyle Capabianco signs with the Jets. A 2-year deal worth about $700,000. Again, a depth defenseman. But
Who
let's
is he?
quickly
Another defenseman. That's great. So now we have another guy that can play. And what are you going to do with him? At 750, I sure hope it's a 2-way contract. It probably is.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just interesting. Whoop. Hang on a second.
I'm still here.
Am I okay? You got me now?
Yep, I'm still here. You are too.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, my internet's just freezing every now and then. Again, go figure. But no, seriously. I mean, yeah. We'll talk about the Jets defenseman here. in just 1 second. I just want to finish my thought on the Ottawa Senators here. Um, what are your thoughts in general? I know we talked about the Brinket last week, but Claude Giroux to Ottawa, a bunch of pieces that Ottawa's kind of bringing in here. Are you um, are you encouraged by what Ottawa's, I guess, trying to do? I mean, I hesitate to give them a day one free agency because we said that about Winnipeg last year, and how did that end up? But
Yeah.
are you
Excuse me.
excited by the prospect of this is no longer selling off prospects and getting prospects in, and now you're bringing in actual roster pieces to supplement your young core?
Yeah. I think Ottawa, I think we've talked about this, but Pierre Dorian, he's on the hot seat. They have to start winning games. And so I think he sees it. This is their window of time. Uh, Stutzla is there now. He's been in the league now. He's going into a second year or third year. I don't know, second year, third year. So he's there. You've added these forwards, you've added veterans, and now you've added a goaltender, a proven goaltender in the Cam Talbot. So, but they're still thin on defense. Other than what's his name? Other
Shabbat.
than the pardon?
Thomas Shabbat, yeah.
Shabbat. Other than Shabbat, they are very thin on defense. So, but they're better. They're better. I know one of the comments that came in is they're going to be better than the Leafs. I'm not sure about that, but they will be competitive, Ottawa. They will be in games, but I still think they're not done. I still think they're going to add some pieces on defense, and that's where the Jets might come in. I mean, Jets making a splash, signing some eighth or seventh or eighth defenseman from Arizona that I've never heard of. If that's a splash, that's a splash in a Mr. Turtle pool or in a bird bath. It's not a big splash, and nobody's going to get wet from it. It's nothing. It's a fart in a windstorm. Like, the Jets got to start getting serious. People are ticked, and I think they've got lots of salary cap room now. They want to go young. They want to move in Sandberg and Heinola and Morgan Barron into the lineup. All these young players, they got to move out some salary. And they can move out some defensemen, some veteran defensemen. So whether that's Pionk or Schmidt or even Brendan Dillon, which I wouldn't be in favor of, if they've got to move some pieces out in order to free up, that will bring back some return. And you can phone Ottawa because they're looking at adding some pieces on the defensive side. So I think once this whole wave of the frenzy and free agency kind of fades, then there's going to be teams that are going to take a step back. And that's usually what the Jets do. And they kind of look and see and say, oh, you need a defenseman? We've got some. How would you like so-and-so? And then you can trade and you can do your thing. And that's where the Jets are going to play, not in the edges, but they're not. The Jets have never been a team to go out there and throw money at this hot free agent or this hot free agent. They're kind of smart. They sit back with their money and they don't make foolish mistakes. There are more mistakes done during free agent frenzy than there are great signings. More mistakes than home runs over the years when you look at it.
Let's talk about something else quickly as it relates to the Jets, Rick. We have a new backup goalie. I'm just going to pull back to Rob's comment to start off here. Will Big Save Dave be an adequate backup goaltender for the Jets? Obviously, Eric Comrie kind of priced himself out of Winnipeg. I would strongly disagree with that notion. He was about, I think they said 60 or 80 minutes away from just becoming an RFA, where the Jets would have retained his rights. Instead, he becomes a Class 6 free agent, which is basically a UFA under the Class 6 classification. So that leaves him free to sign with anybody. Are you surprised Derek Comrie moved on from the Jets? And did the Jets make a calculated gamble that didn't really pay off? Where do you sit on the Eric Comrie thing before we get to David Riddick?
Well, I know Riddick was good in the Calgary a few years back when he played there. I don't know what he's been doing the last few years, where he's been or who he's played with, but Eric
Nashville.
Comrie proved, is that right, Nashville? Okay. Eric Comrie proved to me last year that he was a very good NHL backup goalie. And the Jets should have played him more. You and I talked about this. I didn't know about what qualifies him to be an RFA versus a UFA after this contract runs out with his age and number of years played or number of years of service, whatever. But in my mind, it shows you that I think the Jets made a mistake, because all you had to do is put Eric Comrie in a few more games, especially when you were out of it at the end. Why not play him more? And why not play him more and then retain him? So, like you say, is it a calculated gamble, or did they know exactly what they were doing and they didn't want to hold on to him? I don't know. So it's a good question. And Riddick, I don't know, what are his numbers from Nashville? I don't know. I didn't watch Nashville that much last year, so I don't know.
I can pull it up here. Six wins. He only played 11 or 12 games here.
Wow. Probably played less than Comrie.
But you know what? He was in the same boat as Eric Comrie was. He couldn't get on the ice. That was UC Zaros's team last year. And for whatever reason, they didn't want to play him. But if he can get back to some semblance of what he was in Calgary, the Jets will be very, very happy with that. To me, Rhett, and I'm sorry to suggest this to you, but I think you'd agree with me. I actually believe that the appropriate number for Connor Hellebuyck to play, as far as games, is in that 55 to 60 range, probably closer to 55. If you want to get to where you want to go come season's end. To me, the issue becomes if Comrie is an RFA, he has arbitration rights. He could take the Jets to arbitration and push the number far beyond what the Jets are wanting as far as arbitration goes.
Could be.
So, I don't know. I don't know what the appropriate answer is on that. Chevy seemed to say yesterday he didn't think they would be able to retain Eric Comrie if he was an RFA. I'm not so sure about that one. Eric Comrie loves Winnipeg, loves everything about Winnipeg. I think there was a deal to be made. However, if you looked at the serviceable options within the Jets' budget for goaltending, which I suggested was somewhere between the league minimum and about 1.5 to 1.7 million, David Rittich is a pretty good option if he can get back to what he was back a couple years ago with the Flames. The only kind of caveat I'll say to that is if we have to find out if Rittich goes back to his Calgary numbers by overplaying them, that means something bad has happened to Connor Hellebuyck. Like, to me, this screams to me that Connor Hellebuyck is going to play 65, 70 games again. Do I agree with it? No. Is it probably going to happen? Yes.
You think so? But wait, but what about this? I don't know. I think he's going to play no more than 70 games this year. I think the ideal would be 60 to 65. Like, he's playing roughly 3 to 4, and then he gets a break. Roughly, he plays 4 out of 5, and then 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5, 3 out of 4 throughout the season, however that works out.
Do we agree, Rick, that there's no way the team can return to the ice in its current form this fall?
Yeah, I agree. Like, I told you, it's not enough to just have a new head coach. You've got to, they have to get younger. They have to bring in those new pieces. Perfetti, I mean, we listed them. Perfetti, Barron, Heinola, Samberg, even Logan Stanley on a regular basis, not as the seventh defenseman, but in the lineup. So you got 6 guys right there, and that'll help the Jets. That'll help to keep
Kovacevic,
them.
Devontae, on and on go the list.
No. Kovacevic is not good enough to be an NHLer. I don't believe. He hasn't shown enough to be an NHLer. Some guys
How
will
do,
just be.
how do you know if he hasn't played there, though?
He has played in the NHL. He did play for the Jets, and he was very average.
And you weren't impressed with his small sample size?
No, he hasn't stood out. Why isn't he not popping off the page with the Moose?
He was one of their top 3 defensemen last year.
Yeah, okay. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying a top 3 defenseman. Some guys are AHLers for life, and they're great AHLers, but they're not NHL guys. So I'm just saying you have to pop. When Josh Morrissey played with the Moose, he popped off the page. When Kyle Connor played for that 1 year, he popped. Hellebuck, he was the best goalie in the AHL for that year. So I'm just saying you have to. You can't just be the Moose's best defenseman. You've got to be like, and look at Sami Niku was top defenseman for the AHL. Where is he now? Yeah. Selling used cars in Sweden. I'm just saying you've got to separate yourself from the pack. And to me, Kovacevic hasn't done enough. He's a good guy. Plays in the AHL. He'll be a career AHLer. I just don't think he has enough to make it to the NHL. That's my opinion. But whatever.
Here's the interesting part, Rick. Are you of the notion, and I think you were hinting at this earlier, that there are to be some trades made once the market kind of settles in free agency? Because it seems to me like there's a lot of overspending going on, and once teams find out whether they get their successive targets as far as their wants in free agency, they could circle back as far as trades goes. Do you see that as a possibility?
Yeah. I think there'll be a lot of that sort of after the free agency, the frenzy so-called fades away. Then guys will get signed. Like look at Paul Stastny. He had one of his best years in probably 10 years with the Jets last year. And he's a good, reliable player. Now, does he still want to play in Winnipeg? I don't know if Winnipeg wants him to be in Winnipeg. He'll find a spot, but the teams go crazy with the high-end guys, and then the guys sort of in the middle of the pack, and those guys, they sign contracts here and there after all the big money is thrown around and settled. And then teams might have to do some trading to get some players, because I think Ottawa is going to have to do some trading in order to supplement what they have on their defensive side, because I don't think they have enough in my opinion.
And they could really supplement, because I think they need a different style defenseman for playing in the Eastern Conference. One of the guys that really pops off the page for me but would look good in Ottawa colors, and he's already been there, is Dylan DeMello. The Jets acquired him from Ottawa. There's a whole bunch of teams that could use a Brandon Dillon. There's a couple teams that could use a Nate Schmidt. To me, you have to clear this backlog, and you just can't say, we don't have a spot for you. There's no competition, blah, 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 blah. This is a new coaching staff, new regime, and as far as I'm concerned, outside of maybe 4, 5, or 6 players that have their roster spot locked up, to me, everything else should be an open audition. If Morgan Barron is a better fourth line center than what you have now, then that's the way it's going to be. If Billy Hainela beats out Brandon Dillon, that's the way it's going to be. If Dylan Sandberg plays well in your top 4 and beats out Dylan DeMello, that's the way it's going to be. If David Riddick manages to wrestle the crease away from a few more games from Connor Hellebuck, that's the way it's going to be. If Logan Stanley's not good enough, he's going to find himself on the waivers. Like, to me, this idea that guys are locked into their positions from last year, especially with the new coach, is a horrible line of thinking. And everything that you want to do is about creating internal competition. So as far as I'm concerned, there's 4 spots on the defense up for grabs. maybe with the exception being Josh Morrissey and Brendan Dillon, if you wanna go there. There's three, maybe four spots in our bottom six up for grabs. Maybe more if you move on from Blake Wheeler. Like, to me, to be sitting here in July next week, once all the dust settles, and start putting things in ink for opening night, I think doesn't serve the purpose. The Jets showed last year that they were a flawed team, and it had nothing, in my mind, to do with coaching. It had nothing to do, in my mind, with being a great team. Over an 82 game season, Rick, the season is long enough that, and we've used this line countless times, it makes people dizzy on this show. You are what your record says you are.
Mhm.
And listen, I understand that, it's Calgary. They were, you know, second last in the Canadian division 2 years ago, and then they went to first in the Pacific. Yeah, that was with Daryl Sutter and some changes on the outside. That wasn't the exact um, same lineup. And I think Rick Bonus has to be, what's the word? He has to be forceful. But if this guy wins a spot and he needs to make a change, management needs to allow him to make those changes. Management can't have this short sighted vision of, this is our team going into camp. This was our team last year. We are so loyal to these guys, but we cannot get over the fact that we can't get over the fact that last year was an aberration. Because I'll tell you what, if you end up in the same spot this year as you did last year, well, then Chevy's job might be on the line.
Yeah, I would agree. I just don't think you can count on just a new coaching staff and potentially a new system being enough. I think there are some issues in the dressing room, so those things need to be sorted out. And then I think the Jets have to add a little bit more youth and a little
Mhm.
bit more sandpaper into the lineup. And how they do that, I'm not sure. I have
I,
some
I,
idea,
I think they
but
had a pretty good start if you want to talk about the future and Rutger McGordy and Brad Lambert. But you know what? That's 2 years down the line. That's not the right
yeah,
now. Um,
yeah, at least 2 years down the road. Yep.
like 2 years down the road doesn't really help if your situation right now, for all intents and purposes, Red Bonus might not be the coach when those two guys crack the lineup.
You're
It,
right.
it's it's just it's just like, to me we've seen a real bad regression since that run to the conference final. You could argue, okay, we lost Bufflin. We lost this player. We lost that player. We lost Myers. We lost Surratt. But to me, those can no longer be excuses. And this Trey hit an absolute nail on the head here. How many more years of this meh play by the Jets does it need to take for Chevy's chair to get hot? Trey, I'm telling you right now, same thing happens this coming year that happened this year. Fans, media, owners, they won't stand for it. They've already lost way too many season ticket holders, by my understanding, and potential sponsors. You can't. And if you're the bottom line is, if Red Bonus says he wants to get this team into playoffs, which is I think the ultimate goal of 32 NHL teams once the season starts, bringing back the same roster and thinking it's going to change is very, very. It's short-sighted thinking. Anyway, my rant is done. Um,
Good.
we better start seeing some results and some opportunities for these young kids, because if it's a lot of what we've already seen, I won't be watching a lot of games this year. I'll be touching them on my PVR, and if I want to watch it, great. If not, there's the delete button.
Right. But Michael, let me put this out there though.
Okay.
We've talked about the Shovel Dayoff and Chipman are tight. So it's not like Shovel Dayoff and Chipman talk and Chipman says, I'd like the team to go in this direction, like whether it is play more young guys or play more veterans or sign more free agents or sign less free agents or draft and develop. And Chevy wants to do the opposite. And then Chevy does the opposite. And then Chipman says, well, if it goes great, that's great. But if it goes down the toilet, then I'm cutting you adrift. Like, that's not their relationship. They are two peas in a pod. Like they are very in sync with each other in terms like what they do, what the Jets do in free agency, what they do, not getting caught up in these bidding wars and all these different things. That's all got Chipman's blessing and his fingerprints all over that. So what I'm saying to you is this. I'm saying they've talked about what they have to do this year. They had to get a new coach. Okay. So and a new coaching staff. They thought Trotz, now Bonus, also a very good defensive-minded coach. They have to be better defensively. But I think, and this is my long way of getting there, is that I think Shovel Dayoff, he knows they can't just push out the same lineup as last year, except for maybe Comrie or maybe Paul Stastny not getting re-signed and Andrew Kopp coming back and putting out the exact same lineup with the exact same guys on the defensive end and so on and so forth and expect to have completely different results, because that's foolishness. Like, I think they know that. I think they realize they have to do something better as a team in terms of structure and defensive play, but they've also got to change the mix. Now, what that is and how they do it, that I don't know. But it makes sense. You just think about, I think that they have to move defensemen. They can't have all these guys that are NHL defensemen. They can't have 10 NHL defensemen on their roster. I mean, it's just dumb. You can't even carry them. You can't send those guys. You can't send Haynola and Sandberg back down to the Moose for another year when they're ready to play. Like, so they have to make trades. They have to. And they will. And I think they're going to move out some defensemen, whether that's for draft picks or for some third and fourth line players with a little bit more sandpaper, a little bit more grit. And that's how the Jets, I think, are going to change their makeup on the third and fourth lines. That's, I think, how they're going to trade away defensemen and they're going to bring back forwards. That's my prediction, because they're not going to go in that game. They're just not.
Here's another interesting kind of thought. Is it possible that the Jets overvalue their own players?
No.
I guess I should rephrase that.
I know what you're getting at.
If a team comes to Winnipeg, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I know where you're going with this, but here's what I would say. The Jets are under one constraint that other teams or most other teams don't have, and that is Winnipeg is not a hot spot for free agency. For me personally, if I was in the NHL, there's only one place I'd want to play, and that's Winnipeg. And that's because I'm a Winnipeg guy, and I'd want to play for my hometown. But most other guys, they'd rather play in Florida. Would you rather play on the East Coast, less travel, or play on the West Coast, play in LA, like play where the weather's warmer? So or San Jose or in Anaheim. So I'm saying a lot of guys, they don't look at Winnipeg as being this great place to play. So the Jets have to play a little bit differently in the NHL sandbox when it comes to free agents and trades and how you keep players. They've got to be a little bit more loyal. They've got to be, I think we've talked about this, they've got to treat the players number one, which they do, and they're first class all around how they communicate and all what they do for the players and the players' families and their wives and et cetera, which is all good. They should, because they have to do the things that they can control, because they can't control weather and they can't control, the income tax rate in Manitoba or in Canada versus in Florida or in California, right? So that's what the Jets got to do. So to my point, that's where I think sometimes they're a little bit more loyal, because they don't want to have all this churn and trade this guy and bring this guy in, because they're not going to play. If you get rid of a bunch of guys, or you cut a bunch of guys, or you buy out a bunch of guys, how are you going to find those guys to fill that void? You got to sign free agents. Well, you might not get a free agent. Look at what happened with Calgary. Gaudreau signed for $10 million less over 10 years than what he got in Columbus, according to reports, for 10 or 15 dollars.
I understand that mindset too, but if your prospects are ready and you're not playing them because you want to be loyal to guys that didn't have a great season, that's what draws my ire. And
that I would not agree with. I would not agree with that. Mark, I don't know how much more you want to talk about this, but mark my prediction. This is my prediction. The Jets will trade multiple defensemen out and bring in futures, but I think more likely bring in young players under contract with on third and fourth line ability, with lots of sandpaper in their bones. That's my prediction.
I hope so, because this is a team that's talented, and they're about 2 years away from wasting this core's extremely talented part of their team. Yeah, I just like yeah. Anyway, let's talk about something else. Just that I
Okay.
get so annoyed. You touched on one thing that I think was very interesting. I want to talk about out east a little bit. We talked about Ottawa. What do you make of Johnny Gaudreau going to Columbus?
Crazy. $9.7 million, and Calgary was going to pay him more. Calgary was going to pay him. I heard
the last number I heard with Calgary was 10.25.
Yeah, for 8 years. I think he got more years. I think it was an 8-year, $84 million contract offer from Calgary, or 80. And so over the course of the contract, or no, how much did he get with Columbus? 7-year.
Yeah, 7 times 9.5.
Okay, 7 years and roughly 70, or $68 million. And I heard he was going to get close to 80 million, or 82 from Calgary. 8 years, 80 million, or 82 million. So
and don't forget, because he's a Flames pick, he can get the extra year from Calgary, that 8 years. Anybody else can sign him for 7.
Correct. So, and that's what, but he wanted to go. But you know what the odd part is, versus the taxes you pay in Canada, his contract in Columbus over the whole time under that contract, he'll net out more money probably in that contract in Ohio than he will in Alberta.
But I have a bold prediction about that too, Rick. That the contract will be somewhat of a bust in Columbus, because in fairness, he was averaging less than a point a game in the 3 years leading up to this year. Daryl Sutter comes, he's basically about a 1.45 point player a game, 100 and whatever it was, 15 points.
Yeah.
To me, like, I don't think Johnny Gaudreau as a 100-point player is sustainable. I think what we see is more like the previous 3 years, the 60, 70-point player, 65-point player, then this 115-point player. He had Gaudreau, he had Tkachuk and Lindholm on his line. That line literally carried the Calgary Flames. To me, it's a byproduct of him being a UFA the right year and having that one outlier season when he needs it the most to drive up his contract value. Long term, I think Calgary's going to be okay. Short term, I think Columbus is going to have some regrets about this contract, especially when it comes to trying to re-sign number 29 to a long-term deal.
So yeah, because if you've now signed Gaudreau roughly to $10 million a year for 7 years, what is Laine going to want? All of that.
Yeah, all of that and more.
Maybe. Although you could
right?
argue he's not the same player as Goudreau. He's never been on a point a game pace. But then you
It's
could
too
argue
bad
the goal
because
scorers are.
Columbus was one of the teams I really liked at the draft with their long-term planning. But now you got Didrow. You're maybe looking at making a run with Didrow in 2 to 3 years in that division. I don't know. I don't know. To me, Didrow is not a $9.5 million player. He's in that 6 to 7.5 range.
Well, we'll see. Well, speaking of not being that player, is Andrew Kopp a $5.7 million a year guy for the next 5 years? That's crazy to me. Andrew Kopp being almost $6 million a year. I mean, I love Andrew Kopp. We've talked about him all the time. I think he's a great hockey player. But is this the new end? Like this is the new sort of the new bar that's being set for salaries is guys like Andrew Kopp can get 5.6, 5.7 million a year for 5 years. Wow. Like that's, like I said, that's Mark Scheifele money. I mean, that's what Scheifele's contract is paying him right now. I think it's 6 million or just over 6. So, but I guess that was signed 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and this one is sort of the new thing. But I'm just saying, it's crazy how things escalate. And if Kopp signs for 5.6, 5.7 million, then what's Scheifele worth when he signs in a few years? What's Ehlers worth? What's Kyle Connor worth? Kyle Connor scores twice the amount of goals that Andrew Kopp does. So is Kyle Connor going to want like 10, 11, 12 million dollars for 10 years? It's just nuts, but that's how it is. It's general managers want to win so bad and they don't see the big picture for what this does. They just think about themselves. And as long as it works for their budget, they don't think about what it is for the NHL. And that's where it's to the players' advantage because the players just say, hey, keep the money printing. And I can go to the market. And if you don't want to pay me, I'll find somebody else that will. As long as my skills keep improving, I'll keep getting more and more money. So it's crazy, but that's the NHL world we live in. It's nuts.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I don't think a Goudreau is worth 10, and I don't think Andrew Kopp is worth 5.7, but that's what they got. So
to me, it's too bad because I really liked what Detroit did this year. Billy Husso, a 3-year deal. Couple of other small pieces there. Yeah, to me, it's super if you have cap space. Um, if you have cap space, you're gonna win the day on the first day of July in free agency. If not, to me, I wonder, is it the pressure to win and have
look at this is a good point. To your point, who are the biggest players in terms of acquisition of not so much prospects and young players, but NHL guys, drivers? Who are those teams? Except for Carolina getting Brent Burns, sort of upgrading their defensive core and getting rid of D'Angelo to Philadelphia and bringing in Brent Burns.
And somehow forking up enough money to get $7 million Matt Pacioretty.
You're right. Well, because they took that money off of Vegas's hands because Vegas wasn't cap compliant. But look at the teams. You could argue the 3 teams that have done the most in free agency now are Ottawa, Columbus, and who did another big spot? And Detroit. And what is the significance of those 3 teams? None of them were in the playoffs last year.
They spent money.
And they were below the salary cap, but none of them were in the playoffs. So that just tells you the general managers, they got to win. Like their owner, you can't just say, oh, we're on this plan, and then you lose. Like even Detroit, I mean, they've been on that plan for a long time. If I'm a fan of Detroit, I'm getting to the point where let's start to see some winning because I've seen this rebuild happening for 5-6 years. It's time to start winning. So, and I think that's how it is in Ottawa and in Columbus and in Detroit is that these teams, they want to win and they're pushing to win now because the general managers will be on the hot seat if they don't start to win soon. So
it's unfortunate because it's owners' money more so than not being flushed down the toilet because if you're 31 of the 32 NHL teams, you're going to end your season disappointed. There's only one team that says they didn't made all the right moves over the course of a
True,
season, and that's if you're
true,
holding the Stanley Cup in late June.
true. But remember, none of these deals get made without the blessing of ownership.
That's
There's
true.
no way that Goudreau signs that deal in Columbus without Columbus ownership okaying it. There's no
That's
way that Detroit, Yzerman's got a lot of power in Detroit, but he's not signing these guys to these contracts without having the blessing of ownership to say, yes, we want to acquire some more valuable assets through unrestricted free agency and acquire these players to come in and make a pitch to them. That's their plan. So it's good on them. They can. I don't think it's the wise plan. I still don't. I think long term, you make more mistakes in getting into the frenzy than not. And even though a lot of fans don't like it, I wish sometimes the Jets would make a big splash. The other side of me says, you know what? I'm glad that they don't. When they were close to winning, they went out and they got Hayes from Philadelphia and they threw away a first-round draft choice. When they were close to winning again, they went out and they got Paul Stastny and threw away a first-round draft choice. When they had their chance, when the iron was hot, they tried to go for it. It didn't work out. Now they're replenishing their stock, but they're not going to be in that flash. I think you're going to see things kind of shake down, and in the next few weeks, the Jets are going to make some acquisitions. They're going to sign a UFA, a lower tier if you want, and I think they're going to make some trades. And they don't have to sign anybody big. Like they don't have to bring in a DeBrincat or they don't have to bring in a Giroux, right? I don't think they have to kind of add on their third and fourth line. I think that's what and they have to subtract on their defense. And that is a little bit easier to do than to get into the frenzy on the first day of free agency. So
what do you make of the goalie market? Toronto walking away from Jack Campbell, who subsequently signs 5x5 in Edmonton.
yeah,
Word on the street is Toronto didn't want to go the 5th year. They end up turning to Ilya Samsonov and Matt Murray. To me, that looks like the house of cards ready to collapse more than
really.
actual winning hockey games.
Samsonov is a good goalie.
Sorry?
Samsonov is a good goalie. What are you talking about? House of cards ready to fall? You don't think Matt Murray and Samsonov are a good 1A, 1B combo?
It could be, but Matt Murray hasn't played an awful lot of games in the last number of years.
Yes,
if this was the Matt Murray of 5 years ago coming off back-to-back Stanley Cups, he wouldn't be a Toronto Maple Leaf in my mind. Tristan Jarry wouldn't have been a Pittsburgh Penguin. Casey DeSmith wouldn't have been a Pittsburgh Penguin. Ottawa Senators wouldn't have moved on from Matt Murray. It's quite interesting, however, that they got Cam Talbot. Trey had an interesting question here. But give me, Rick, your thoughts on the 5x5 from Campbell from Edmonton to Campbell.
I think Edmonton, we've been talking about this for the last few years. Edmonton's kind of always been doing a little bit of a patchwork job on their goaltending. They've never had this sort of 1A, like number one goalie. And that's who they have now in Jack Campbell. So I think Edmonton has addressed their goaltending issue. They have a number one goalie, and he's a good goalie, and they made the right move. Should the Leafs have signed Jack Campbell? I think they should have. Will they be okay with Samsonov and Murray? Yes and no. I think Samsonov is a great starter, and you can have Murray as his backup, and you see how Murray plays and how his health is, and you manage them. But the great thing about it, by having two sort of starters, is this sort of a 1A, 1B. You go with whoever's hot, and you go with whoever stays healthy, right? And they've both proven themselves to be great goaltenders in the past. There's nobody out there. There's no Vasilevsky or Bobrovsky hanging out there, or Hellebuck in free agency waiting to be plucked by the Leafs, because then the Leafs would have done it, right? So the only one there really was Jack Campbell, but they didn't want to sign Jack Campbell. Maybe they knew something. I don't know. They let him go, and now they have two guys that I think will fill the gap. So it's all the Leafs could do. I don't think the Leafs could do anymore. I think they were kind of put into a corner. There is nobody else out there sort of front and center, right, if you will.
Okay, so on that, couple things here before we wrap up because we gotta
Yep.
get going. We might go a minute or two late because I want to hit on these topics here.
Okay,
Um, since we probably won't be back till October.
rapid fire.
Trey, I'll get to your comment about a soft cap in just a minute, and I think that requires a bigger conversation. What do you make of what Washington has done with their goaltending? They moved Vincent Vanacek at the draft. They moved on from Ilya Samsonov. They
Yep.
signed Darcy Kemper.
Yep.
Happy with that move? Good
Very
move
good
for
move.
Washington. Has goaltending been an issue for the Capitals?
Yep. Great move for Washington. And I don't think they're done. I think Washington is the front runner to get Kadri on sign onto a piece of paper.
That
So
could be a lot of fun.
yeah, I think he's the one. He makes sense there because they've lost their centerman there. Is it Nordstrom
Yeah, Backstrom.
or Backstrom? Sorry, and they need somebody there to play center, and he's the number one guy out there. They might make a pitch for Paul Stastny too to help out, but I could see them signing Nazem Kadri, and now they've got a really good goaltender, a winner, a Stanley Cup winner in Darcy Kemper, and he's proved that he can win. Kemper's a good goalie, so the Capitals had to do something, and so that's what they decided to do. I think it's a great move for them.
I think too, if Colorado has taught us anything here, Rick, it's that you just need adequate goaltending to win. You don't need great goaltending. I don't think Darcy Kemper single-handedly stole the Medem in the playoffs, but at least I can count on one hand.
Mm-hmm.
So just adequate goaltending gets the job done.
Yep.
Really quickly, Trey, I want some clarification on this if you're still watching. Trey, should the NHL implement a soft cap like some of the other leagues do? I don't know, Trey. Like, I want to answer your question, but I want you to explain what you mean by soft cap, because there's a there's a salary cap floor that kind of acts like a soft cap. Um, what do you mean by soft cap? We'll get back to that in just a second as well while you type in there if you don't mind. But the other thing I wanted to quickly touch on, it was we kind of talked about this one, but kind of a surprise, kind of not. Evander Kane back in Edmonton. Something that I wouldn't have foreseen 2 weeks ago. Is this Evander Kane saying, I had a lot of success with Draisaitl, a lot of success with McDavid. Let's keep it going. And have the Edmonton Oilers moved themselves into a Stanley Cup contender status?
Yeah, well, I don't know if they've moved themselves into that. With signing Kane, they're just retaining what they had. I think they've improved by getting Jack Campbell signed, so their defense has gone up. They lost to Duncan Keith, so they're going to have to still, I think, add some parts on their defensive side. And they lost Zach Kassian, but they're going to bring in some younger players. So I think for Evander Kane, I would agree with you. I think he's had the most success that he's had in the last 10 years playing with either Draisaitl, McDavid, or both. And why would you not? I mean, they paid fair market value for him. There's always a little bit of risk with Evander Kane. So I think he got $5 million or $5.5 million for 4 years, something like that. I think it's 4-year, 20 million or 22 million. So
Okay, so Trey clarifies. He said, like MLB, where there's a cap and then there's a luxury tax after that.
I know.
Where do you sit on that? Because to me, hockey going to a luxury tap is a non-starter. In a way, because that's how the Jets left Winnipeg in the first place.
Well, there was no cap before, but I don't like the system. If you're asking me, I don't like Major League Baseball. I think it stinks because the teams that are rich, they don't mind. Yankees go over, Philadelphia goes over, all the teams with big money, Boston. Why is it that it's the same teams in the playoffs all the time, again and again and again, for the most part in Major League Baseball? Because they're all the teams that are rich, that are in huge markets with huge television contracts, and they could play, and then the other teams trade away their stars when they get priced out. Miami, Tampa Bay, you just go down this Kansas City, Colorado, Seattle. It just goes on and on and on. They just trade away their players. So to me, I don't like it at all. I like a hard cap, and it keeps everybody on the same level playing field. If you don't, then you've got winners and losers, and you'll never have a chance to win the Stanley Cup if you're in Winnipeg or Calgary, or you pick your small market team. So
Yeah, it's interesting too for sure. Trey says so. Winnipeg could overpay to get guys here, could balance some of the market issues out. I don't know if money fixes that issue. I think there's another way. Um, I think there's another way to supplement the problem. Uh, for sure. Small markets can be very well in MLB, even if teams like the Dodgers and Yankees pay over 200 million for their roster. I see the plus and minus to both. I think MLB should have lost this year to implement the salary cap, but that's just me. Um, yeah, it's interesting, right? And then Trey Town is back. Did these teams win? Is my question. Not lately, but fair point. Yeah, it's a debate, right? And like I said, only one team out of 32 wins the cup every year. So
right.
that's
In Major League Baseball, if you look at who's won the World Series for the last 20 or 30 years since
yeah,
the
for the
soft
most
cap
part.
and luxury tax have come in, it's all been teams that have overspent relative to the soft cap almost exclusively, like
Yeah,
29 out of the last 30 years or 28 out of the last 30. So
yeah.
it
I
just
I I
shows.
don't know how I would feel about the Detroit's overspending. The teams with a lot of money. NHL had that issue before, and that's why we lost the season to get the salary cap put in, which was the game saver. That's why the Jets are even here to begin with. Really quickly, Rhett, to wrap up the season as a whole, we talked the best we could about free agency. Uh, Thank you, Trey, for watching. I will see you on Monday night for sure for our show, or maybe you're off next Monday. But anyway, thanks for watching, Trey. Really quick question, Rhett, to wrap it up. Season as a whole, what did you learn about this season as a whole, and what excites you about next year?
What did I learn about the season as a whole? Well, I like the fact, well, I learned that hockey is way better in front of fans than in front of empty arenas. So the hockey's better. I think the players like it better. The intensity, watching it is better. So all of that is better. So I'm glad we're back to arenas with fans in them. I think we're going to continue to see this sort of push that the league is going to go younger and younger. I just think you're going to have, and maybe a few veterans get signed because they're superstars like your Stamkoses or whoever, or Hedmans or whoever your older guys are in their late 20s into 30s. They'll get their big money, but the rest of the league is going to be younger and younger, and you're going to see guys getting signed to larger deals before they've proven anything, like the Josh Morrises. You're going to see more and more of that, and less of rewarding guys after they've achieved something. So I just think we're just going to go into a younger league, and it's going to push middle of the road players either on the outside looking in or forcing them to sign undervalue or contracts less than their value. That's what I think. So
Here's a question just to wrap up here. I know we're 2 weeks into free
yep.
agency, and there's a fairly long way to go with this. Um, but has the balance of power shifted at all in hockey, or is that a remains to be seen kind of thing based on the way this offseason still could go?
Yeah, I actually, you know what? I could see, yeah, there's going to be some shifting. I think some teams are getting older, some teams are getting younger, and some teams are kind of figuring out what it is. I don't know. It's a good question. Everybody thinks like they're going to be a cup contender at the beginning of the season after free agency is done and they've signed their players and they start the season without a win or a loss or a game played. They all
Yeah.
think they've got a shot. Like we thought the Jets would be so great, and they ended up falling way far short from what we thought they would. So I don't know. I think some teams are gonna some teams are going to surprise. I think Philadelphia with Tortorella, they're going to surprise. They're not going to be Stanley Cup contenders, but they're going to be a thorn in the side of whoever they play against. I think Ottawa is going to be better. I think Edmonton is going to be better because they've signed their goalie there, Jack Campbell. Yep. I think Colorado could fall a little bit because they lost Kemper, and they lost also Burakovsky too. He signed a big deal with somebody. Yeah. Sorry, the dogs are barking.
That's all good. They're telling us to wrap it up, so that's what we're gonna do. Thank you very much for tuning in this season. This is our last scheduled show, unless head breaks loose in the off season and it requires an emergency show. Stay tuned for that. Red, thank you for another great season. Always been great to talk hockey with you for an hour every week. Much appreciated. And we'll see you in the fall for another season of the Ultimate Hockey Show, details of which still being confirmed. For Red Petty, this is Michael Gell saying thank you very much for watching this season. On demand, you can catch us on YouTube all season here going forward in the off season. If you missed anything, we'll be back if there's an emergency podcast required. If not, we'll see everybody in October, a week before the season starts, to wrap up and set up the season as well. For Red Petty, Michael Gell saying have a great rest of your evening, and we will talk with you next season. Have a great summer, everybody. So long.